Welcome to City Vision University's podcast, providing book summaries of books on rescue missions, city missions, and the Salvation Army. So I want you to imagine just for a second, walking into a dimly lit basement. We're talking 1840s London.
Oh, wow.
And you are entirely unarmed, like no weapons at all.
Just walking right in.
Right. And the local police, they absolutely refuse to enter this particular neighborhood unless they have a heavily armed squad.
Yeah, because it's that dangerous.
Exactly. And the room you've just stepped into, it is completely packed with, like, professional pickpockets, violent enforcers, and guys fencing stolen goods.
A literal den of thieves.
Yes. But here's the kicker. You aren't there to arrest them, and you aren't there to buy anything from them either. You are there to simply sit down and, well, ask them about their life.
Which sounds completely insane to us today.
It really does. But today, for our deep dive, we are looking at the exact people who walked into those rooms on purpose.
And, it's a really profound departure from the way we usually picture the Victorian era. I mean, when we think of 19th century London, our cultural memory defaults to top hats and horse-drawn carriages.
Yeah, grand palaces, Dickensian sort of wealthy folks.
Exactly. We picture this world of the aristocracy.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality for the vast majority of the population was this crushing, suffocating, almost inescapable poverty.
It was grim.
Extremely.
Yeah.
You had a city undergoing this hyper-expansion because of the Industrial Revolution, and it led to levels of squalor that are frankly difficult for the modern mind to even comprehend.
And the focus of today's deep dive is the founding, the evolution, and really the astonishing societal impact of a group that looked at all that squalor and just decided to wade right into it. I'm talking about the London City Mission.
Yes.
And we are pulling all of our insights today from a really fascinating primary text. It's an 1875 book.
Which is pretty rare to have something this detailed from that exact time.
Right. It's titled Round the Tower, or The Story of the London City Mission. And it was written by John Matthias Weylland.
And it actually includes an introduction by the Earl of Shaftesbury.
Yeah, which is a big deal, right?
It's a huge deal. If you know your history, he was one of the most prominent social reformers of the entire Victorian age.
So having a primary source like Weylland's book, I mean, it's invaluable.
Oh, absolutely. Because it gives us a completely unfiltered ground-level view of the streets.
It's not some sterilized historical retrospective.
No, not at all. It was written by someone who was deeply entrenched in the work. He's detailing the exact mechanisms of how this tiny grassroots non-denominational movement managed to do what the established powers of the British Empire simply could not figure out how to do.
So our mission today, for you listening, is to tear the source material apart. We want to understand the actual mechanics of their success, like how did they organize?
How did they survive the hostility?
Exactly. And whether you're working in modern social reform or you're studying history or, you're just looking for insights into how to connect with incredibly hard to reach demographics.
There is an absolute masterclass in grassroots organization buried in these pages.
There really is. We are essentially studying a massive social disruption that occurred long before, disruption became a corporate buzzword.
Right, way before Silicon Valley co-opted the term.
Exactly. Which brings us directly to the architect of this disruption, a guy named David Naismith.
Yes, Naismith.
The book details that he was born in 1799. And before he even set foot in London in the 1830s, he wasn't just theorizing about social work.
He was a practitioner.
He was. He had spent his early years actively forming similar city missions in Glasgow, in America, and in Paris.
So he was a serial organizer.
Yeah, he really knew how to build a coalition.
And that background is critical. I mean, he arrives in London not as some naive idealist, but as a heavily seasoned strategist.
Right.
And what he finds in London genuinely shocks him. He identifies this massive, glaring disconnect between the established church and the urban poor.
He specifically zeroes in on the Tower Hamlets, right?
He does. And the Tower Hamlets were these sprawling districts immediately surrounding the Tower of London. Now, if you go back a few centuries, these are actually pretty pleasant semi-rural districts.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But by the 1830s, the wealthy had completely fled to the west, the Industrial Revolution had exploded, and these eastern areas became vast, densely packed congeries of human habitation.
Just totally overcrowded.
Overcrowded, entirely unsanitary, and utterly abandoned by any moral, educational, or religious institution.
Okay, so let's unpack his initial strategy here, because it seems entirely logical on paper. Yeah. Naismith sees this massive societal failure, right?
Right.
So he goes to the top of the food chain, He approaches the Bishop of London.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And he pitches what seems like a total no-brainer, a united mission. He wants Christians of all different denominations to pool their resources, put aside their theological squabbles, and tackle this poverty together.
A completely united front.
Right. And the bishop just flat out rejects him.
He does. And the bishop's reasoning, it provides a perfect window into the political and religious architecture of the era.
How so?
Well, the bishop stated that what he called a promiscuous body.
Oh, what?
A promiscuous body. That was his term for a mixed group of different Christian denominations operating without strict, centralized church government.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. He said this promiscuous body would be inherently unstable. She believed it would lack unity, invite chaos, and ultimately fail.
But I want to push back on the bishop here. Like, was he just being territorial, or did he actually have a valid administrative concern? Because in the 1830s, the Church of England wasn't just a religious group.
No, it wasn't.
It was a state-sponsored monopoly. It
Yep.
was the establishment.
Exactly. It was both territorial and administrative. You have to remember that in the 1830s, cross-denominational work was seen as a radical, almost dangerous paradigm shift.
Like a threat to the system.
Yeah, absolutely. The established institutions were built on incredibly rigid hierarchies and strict adherence to specific doctrines. The Anglican Church functioned almost as a branch of the government.
Right. So to them, mixing denominations is anarchy.
Yeah. The idea of an Anglican, a Wesleyan, a Congregationalist, and a Presbyterian just ignoring their theological differences to focus purely on the common salvation and social uplift, that threatened the entire power structure.
Because it prioritized the immediate needs of the end user, the urban poor.
Yes, over the preservation of the institution itself.
So Naismith is essentially looking at this massive, bloated corporate monopoly that simply refuses to innovate.
Mm-hmm.
And he decides to completely bypass them. He doesn't go on a PR campaign to change the bishop's mind.
He doesn't have time for that.
No. On May 16th, 1835, he gathers just 3 of his friends. They meet in a tiny house near a canal in Hoxton.
Just 4 guys in a room.
It's literally 4 guys in a living room. They pray, and right there, they establish the London City Mission.
And the operational rules they established in that tiny room were really what made the movement viable.
Right.
They didn't just have a vision. They had a highly specific HR strategy.
I love how you put that, an HR strategy in 1835.
But it's true.
Yeah.
They decided that the agents they hired, the missionaries, must be devoted full-time to the work.
No part-timers.
Right. And more importantly, they had to be paid adequately.
Which is a huge distinction because a lot of charity work in the Victorian era was essentially like a hobby for wealthy aristocrats who had free time.
Yes, this sort of noblesse oblige approach.
Right. But Naismith is saying, no, this is a grueling, dangerous profession, and we are going to treat it as a vocation.
Precisely.
Right.
Because if you were going to ask a man to walk into the worst slums in Europe, he cannot be worrying about how he is going to feed his own family. It professionalized the compassion.
Professionalized compassion. I like that. But as we know, no agile startup escapes the wrath of the monopoly for long.
No, they certainly do not.
Within a couple of years, the London City Mission is actually proving the concept. They've raised £1,600, which is a significant war chest in the 1830s.
A huge amount of money.
Yeah. They have agents deployed on the ground. They are getting real results. And that is exactly when the Church of England decides to strike back.
Of course. The establishment realizes they are losing ground, so they form their own official organization called the Pastoral Aid Society.
Like a competitor.
Exactly. They decided they needed their own version of Naismith's mission, but one that remained strictly under the control of the Anglican bishops.
And this triggers an existential crisis for Naismith's group.
A massive one. The creation of the Pastoral Aid Society caused an immediate fracture.
Because people had to choose sides.
Yes. Many of the prominent Anglican clergy and wealthy supporters who had initially backed Naismith felt this intense political and social pressure to resign from his, promiscuous body.
To align with the official church brand.
Yeah, exactly. To align with the church's official organization.
So this threatened to completely bankrupt and destroy the London City Mission. And this is the moment in the text where Naismith does something that I find completely counterintuitive.
It really is.
As the founder, you would expect him to dig his heels in, fight for his board, and go to war with the Pastoral Aid Society.
Most fellows would.
Yeah. But instead, to avoid letting his own presence destroy the work, he resigns. He completely walks away from the organization he built.
It is a true masterclass in avoiding founder syndrome.
It really is.
Naismith recognized a hard truth. His continued presence and his unwavering insistence on a completely undivided, non-denominational board was becoming the primary sticking point for the newly restructured committee.
He became the obstacle.
Yes, he realized he had become a liability to the mission's survival. So he stepped down. And tragically, the physical toll of his constant organizing caught up with him, and he died shortly after in 1839.
Leaving his widow in absolute poverty. Though the text does note that the community he built immediately rallied. Supporters raised £2,420 to support his widow, which is a massive sum.
It speaks volumes about the reverence they had for him.
It does, but his departure leaves us with a massive structural question. The visionary is dead. The charismatic leader is gone.
Right.
How does this newly structured organization actually function on the ground without him? They have a few missionaries, but they are facing millions of impoverished citizens. How do they deploy?
Well, they implemented what might be one of the most rigorously structured, hyperlocal deployment strategies ever recorded in social work.
Okay.
The mission realized very quickly that what they called desultory visiting.
What this means?
It was their term for just walking randomly around the city handing out tracts. Yeah. They realized that was a complete waste of time and resources.
Because it's just too broad. If you talk to 1,000 people once, you change nothing.
Exactly. So they changed the geometry of their approach entirely. They looked at the absolute worst, most impoverished parts of the city and divided them into highly specific districts.
But not geographically, right?
No, not by geographic square mileage. They were drawn by demographics. Each district contained exactly 500 families.
500 families.
Yes. And one single missionary was assigned to each district to act as a permanent domestic chaplain to those specific people.
500 families. I mean, that number is so deliberate. When I read that, I immediately thought of modern epidemiology.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they didn't treat urban poverty and despair like a moral failing. They treated it like a contagion. By isolating 500 families into a specific zone, they could map the social networks, identify the influential figures in that micro-community, and begin to systematically cut off the spread of despair.
That is a phenomenal way to look at it. Sociologically, by restricting an agent to 500 families, the mission guaranteed repeated, inescapable exposure.
You can't just hide from the guy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The missionary couldn't just drop off a pamphlet, feel good about himself, and vanish into the crowds. He was forced to walk the exact same alleys, past the exact same doors, day after day.
Building actual relationships.
Right. He had to learn the specific dynamics, the family feuds, the economic struggles, and the unique psychology of that specific block.
But the text makes it very clear that this was not a warm welcome. Let's look at the first missionary assigned to Spitalfields.
Yeah, but that's a tough story.
The book states that when he first arrived, he was actively repelled. The community hated him. He was seen as a busybody, an intruder from polite society coming to judge them.
And honestly, why wouldn't they view him that way?
Fair point.
I mean, their only interaction with authority figures was usually the police coming to arrest someone or a landlord coming to evict them.
So how does he break through that? Because if I walk into a hostile neighborhood today and just keep knocking on doors after being told to leave, I'm eventually going to be violently removed.
Very quickly.
Yeah. The text mentions he used dogged perseverance, but what does that actually look like in practice?
The mechanism of their success was what the mission called practical sympathy.
Practical sympathy.
Yes. The breakthrough in Spitalfields and everywhere else didn't come from preaching theology. It came from providing tangible material aid.
Real help.
Exactly. These missionaries functioned as de facto social workers. When they knocked on a door and found a family starving or a child dying of typhus, they didn't just offer a prayer.
Right.
They went out and secured medical aid. They helped illiterate families navigate the incredibly convoluted and cruel workhouse system. They advocated for them.
They proved their utility before they ever demanded a hearing for their theology.
Precisely. If you are the only person who consistently shows up when a community is suffering from a cholera outbreak, and you actually bring a doctor or fresh water, the hostility evaporates.
You go from being the enemy to the hero.
You transition from being an intruder to being a critical lifeline.
Yeah.
And that persistence allowed them to find individuals who had completely fallen off the map.
Oh, like the translator.
Yes, Weylland's book highlights this specific character, a translator.
And I just love the Victorian slang in this book. A translator was a cobbler who made his living by taking completely ruined, worn-out boots and literally translating them into usable footwear using scraps of refuse leather.
And this man had completely retreated from society. He was hiding in his room, terrified of what he called the hurly-burly of life in the slums.
Just total isolation.
He had isolated himself completely. The only reason he was found and brought back into a supportive community was because this specific missionary was methodically walking his specific beat of 500 families and refused to leave a single door unknocked.
It's the power of the microscopic focus, but as we move to the next section of the source material, the danger level escalates exponentially.
It really does.
Because it wasn't just poor, struggling cobblers they were visiting. The missionaries intentionally aimed for what they called the deeper depths.
The deeper depth.
The most dangerous, violent criminal strongholds in the British Empire.
They made a strategic choice to target thieves' houses.
Right.
They weren't avoiding the danger zones, they were mapping them and walking right into the center of them.
And the book provides a harrowing snapshot of who actually lived in these deeper depths. There is a detailed encounter with a 15-year-old boy living in the dark arches.
The dark arches were terrible.
They were the damp, subterranean brick tunnels under the railways and streets. And this child tells the missionary he has already been in prison 14 times.
At 15 years old.
At 15. And he casually complains about receiving a tickling.
Which is horrifying.
Yeah, which was their slang for a brutal state-sanctioned whipping.
It really forces you to reevaluate the Victorian criminal underworld. We're conditioned to think of, like, Dickensian masterminds.
Like Fagin or someone.
Exactly. But the reality was desperate, discarded children trying to survive in a brutal penal system that offered no rehabilitation, only physical punishment and containment.
Which makes the work of the missionary in Goodman Fields so unbelievable to me.
Oh, yes.
This specific agent spent so much time in this criminal district that he became a trusted figure to the most hardened felons. He actually established a thieves' parlor.
The thieves' parlor is perhaps the most astonishing logistical achievement in the entire book.
I really need you to explain the mechanics of this to me, because you don't just hang a wooden sign outside a room that says thieves' parlor and expect the criminal underground to show up.
Right.
The text says pickpockets, fences who bought stolen goods, and members of the swell mob.
The high-end con artists.
Right. The swell mob would gather in this missionary's room for safety and advice. How is that physically possible without the police raiding it or the criminals just murdering him?
It functioned because of a very delicate, highly specific suspension of normal societal rules.
How so?
Well, the criminals crested him because he had spent months, perhaps years, proving that he was not an informant. He never acted like the police.
Because the police were just there to punish.
Exactly. The police in Victorian London were purely a suppressive force. Their job was to arrest and punish. The missionary, however, offers something the police could never offer.
An exit.
A tangible, non-judgmental exit strategy.
The book claims he helped criminals reconcile with estranged families, got 28 couples legally married, and somehow sent 25 known criminals to sea.
Yes.
How does a guy with no money and no legal authority convince a sea captain to hire 25 convicted felons? What is the actual mechanism there?
The mechanism is character vouching.
Okay.
In the 19th century, the British Merchant Navy was massive, and captains were frequently desperate for able-bodied crewmen for long, grueling voyages.
But they wouldn't want criminals, right?
No, they wouldn't just hire a known criminal off the street because of the risk of mutiny or theft. The missionary acted as the institutional bridge. Because the missionary had the backing of the London City Mission, which had a growing reputation for moral integrity. His word carried weight.
He became their reference.
Yes. He could go to a captain and say, I personally vouch for this man's desire to reform. He provided the social collateral these men lacked. He gave them a clean slate.
He was literally a one-man parole board.
He was. And the criminals understood the immense value of that. Being a Victorian criminal was exhausting.
Just constantly looking over your shoulder.
You lived in constant paranoia, extreme poverty, and the ever-present threat of the gallows of the penal colonies in Australia. So the thieves' parlor became a neutral sanctuary.
But maintaining that sanctuary required an almost superhuman level of psychological resilience. Let's look at the anecdote of the missionary in the burrow.
Yeah, it is a tough read.
He is walking back from a meeting at night, and he is violently mugged. Two men pinion his arms, grab his throat, and rob him of his watch, a half-sovereign, and his silver.
It's a terrifying physical assault.
For most people, that is the breaking point.
Absolutely.
If you dedicate your life to helping a community and they choke you and rob you, human nature dictates that you walk away. You say, they are beyond saving. Let the police have them.
But the text notes that the moment he physically healed from the attack, he walked directly back into the thieves' kitchen in that exact same district and resumed his work.
I just want to linger on the psychology of that exact moment. Imagine being the mugger.
Right.
You know you robbed this man. You know he saw your face. And a week later, the door opens and he walks back in.
And he's alone.
No police officers, no weapons, no demands for his watch back. He just sits down and asks how you were doing.
It completely short-circuits the adversarial worldview.
It really does.
Criminals survive by believing the world is an us versus them paradigm. Everyone is out to get them, so they have to strike first.
Yeah.
When a victim absorbs an attack, refuses to retaliate, and continues to offer unconditional empathy, it shatters that paradigm.
It proves it's not a trick.
Right. It proves that the missionary's compassion isn't a performance. It is a genuine, unbreakable commitment. And there is nothing more psychologically disarming to a hardened criminal than someone who refuses to be their enemy.
It strips away every defensive layer they have. But as we move forward in the source material, we see that the hidden subterranean criminal dens were only one front of the war.
Just one part of it.
The London City Mission also decided to wage a highly public campaign in the massive arenas of Victorian vice, the Sunday fairs and the public houses.
To understand the scale of these Sunday fairs, you have to completely forget the modern concept of a quiet Sunday morning.
Right.
The book vividly describes the areas around the Tower of London. It was absolute bedlam.
Chaos.
Thousands of people packed into the streets. You had rag fairs selling discarded clothing, bird fairs selling trapped animals.
And the sensory details in Weylland's account are incredible. He describes children desperately trying to sell their mother's soap for a half-penny just to buy bread.
Yeah.
You have thieves openly fencing stolen goods. It's a churning, screaming mass of unregulated commerce and deep desperation. And right in the middle of this chaos, the missionaries are trying to engage people.
And it wasn't a matter of standing on a soapbox and preaching a quiet sermon to a polite crowd.
No.
They were engaging in intense, face-to-face intellectual combat. The text recounts a fascinating encounter at a drinking fountain near the tower.
Right, with the secularist.
A missionary gets into a heated public debate with a secularist, whom the text refers to as an infidel.
And the secularist's argument is remarkably sharp. He argues that, according to the Bible itself, Christ was a Sabbath breaker because he walked through the cornfields and plucked the grain on a Sunday.
It highlights a very important point about the urban poor in Victorian London.
That they weren't ignorant.
They were not unthinking masses. They were politically aware, deeply argumentative, and heavily influenced by radical secular literature of the time.
So the missionary really had to know his stuff?
The missionary couldn't rely on the built-in authority of a pulpit. He had to be a skilled apologist, ready to defend his theology, logically and persuasively, while surrounded by a hostile, jeering crowd in a marketplace.
But debating at a water fountain is one thing. The text reveals that the missionaries decided to take their work directly into the belly of the beast, the public houses.
Yes.
They physically walked into the gin bars and the long rooms. And the book casually mentions this staggering fact. They successfully formed a Bible club inside a public house in the notorious Ratcliffe Highway.
Ratcliffe Highway is crucial context here.
Right.
It wasn't just a bad neighborhood. It was infamous across the globe as one of the deadliest, most vice-ridden streets in the British Empire.
Like legendary bad.
Legendary. It was the epicenter of the sailor districts, lined with brothels, opium dens, and crimps.
Crimp.
Men who would drug sailors and kidnap them to sell them to outbound ships.
Wow.
Decades earlier, it was the site of the notorious Ratcliffe Highway murders. It's a terrifying place.
So mechanically, how on earth does a Bible club survive inside a Victorian gin joint on the deadliest street in London? If you walk into a bar full of drunk sailors and start reading a Bible, you are going to get a glass bottle smashed over your head.
You survive through the strategy of gradual desensitization and by deeply respecting the rules of the space.
Okay, so they didn't just burst in.
The missionary didn't burst through the saloon doors shouting about hellfire. He would walk in quietly. He would buy a non-alcoholic drink.
Right.
He would sit in the corner. He would observe. Eventually, he would strike up a quiet conversation with a bartender or a lonely sailor. He offered a sympathetic ear in a room where everyone else was trying to exploit them.
He became a regular.
Exactly. He became part of the furniture. And by doing so, he engaged in a profound spatial paradox.
Explain that.
Well, in the 19th century, religion was strictly spatial. It happened inside a consecrated church building, surrounded by stained glass.
Right, you go to the church.
By walking into the public house, the missionary completely destroyed that expectation.
Yeah.
He brought the sacred into the most profane space imaginable.
They recognize that if you demand the marginalized clean themselves up and come to your building, you will be waiting forever. You have to invade their space, but do so with total respect.
And this philosophy of meeting people exactly where they are, naturally, evolved into the most sophisticated strategy of the London City Mission.
Hyper-specialized demographic targeting.
Yes, Section 5 of our deep dive.
The mission reaches a point where they realize a one-size-fits-all approach is failing.
Right.
A generalist missionary can't connect with everyone. The daily survival struggles of a cab driver are entirely different from the struggles of a dock worker, which are completely alien to a foreign sailor. So they pivot. They create highly specialized roles.
They essentially map the microeconomies of London and assign specialists to infiltrate them. Let's look at the cabmen.
Oh man, the Victorian cabbie had a brutal existence.
Droll.
The text explains that they had no Sundays off. They worked ungodly hours just to pay the daily rental fee for their horse and cab.
Because they didn't own them.
Exactly. And many of them, specifically the ones they called the bucks, didn't even have homes. They literally slept inside their cabs in the freezing rain.
Because they were in constant motion and completely alienated from normal societal rhythms, a geographic missionary would never see them.
Right. They weren't in the 500 family district.
Exactly. So the mission appoints a specialized missionary strictly for the cabmen. And this is where we see the mission pivot from pure religious instruction to intense labor advocacy.
Which is fascinating.
The missionary forms a cabmen's club.
And they use massive political leverage. The text details how they managed to get Lord Tate to host a midnight meeting specifically for these exhausted cabmen.
A midnight meeting.
Think about the optics of that. You bring a powerful lord into a room full of societal outcasts. This wasn't just a prayer meeting. This was political organization.
It was a union meeting, basically.
Yeah. It generated so much pressure that it eventually led to the government intervening and granting 6-day licenses, giving the cabmen a guaranteed day of rest.
They fundamentally changed the labor laws of the city.
And for the night cabmen who couldn't attend these meetings, the missionaries were tracking them down at the railway stations at 4:00 a.m.,
bringing them hot coffee and conversation while they waited for the early trains.
And they applied this specialized focus to the authorities as well. They assigned a missionary specifically to the police force.
Which seems odd at first glance.
Yeah. Why did the police need a rescue mission?
Because the psychological toll of policing the Victorian slums was catastrophic.
Ah, I see.
The police were despised by the public, underpaid, and surrounded by violence and corruption every single day. The moral hazard was immense.
Right.
The specialized missionary recognized this and focused on building their mental and emotional resilience. He built a library for the H division so they had a place to decompress.
And the appreciation was profound. The text notes that the policemen of the B division were so moved by their missionary that they actually pooled their sixpences, which was a substantial amount of their meager wages, to buy him a 7-pound silver watch.
Wow.
The people paid to suppress the slums were buying gifts for the man trying to save the slums.
It speaks to the concept of esprit de corps, which the Earl of Shaftesbury highlights in his introduction to the book.
Explain that concept in this context. Like, how did they weaponize esprit de corps?
By addressing cabmen exclusively as cabmen, or police exclusively as police, the missionaries leveraged the existing powerful group loyalty within those professions.
That makes a lot of sense.
A cab driver might ignore a random preacher on the street, but he will absolutely listen to the guy who is known, vetted, and respected by all the other cab drivers on the rank.
Right.
The mission used the internal fraternal bonds of these closed groups to foster community-wide reform.
It's brilliant, and they scaled this globally within the city limits. London was the center of global trade, which meant a massive influx of foreigners and minorities.
Yes.
Weylland's book describes the creation of the Maison des Étrangers.
A house of strangers.
Exactly. Missionaries were actively learning multiple languages so they could communicate with Lascars, coolies, and sailors arriving from Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean into the East and West India docks.
They didn't just wait at the docks either.
Oh.
They acquired their own boat, designed their own flag, and rowed out into the Thames to board the ships before the sailors even made landfall and fell into the hands of the crimps.
They were intercepting them.
Yes.
And the list of specialized targets just keeps growing. They had specific missions dedicated to the Jewish population in East London. They hiked out to the gypsy encampments deep in Epping Forest. They targeted the military soldiers garrisoned in the Tower of London. They mapped every subculture and built a custom approach for each one.
It is a phenomenal logistical achievement.
Yeah.
But as you analyze this massive multi-front war on poverty, ignorance, and despair, operating in the slums, the docks, the gin bars, the cabs, at 4 a.m., you went into an insurmountable mathematical problem.
The funding.
Precisely. 4 men in a room in Hoxton cannot bankroll an operation of this magnitude.
Whoa.
To sustain this infrastructure, they needed serious capital and powerful allies.
And Section 6 of our text reveals exactly where that capital came from. It is a crucial, often overlooked engine of Victorian social reform.
Oh, absolutely.
The book literally uses the phrase, lady power.
It is a fantastic detail. When David Naismith was initially making his pitches, he was largely ignored or actively hindered by the powerful men, the bishops, the politicians, the wealthy industrialists.
Right. The Bishop of London rejected him.
Exactly. It was the women of the Victorian era who stepped into the void and funded this disruption.
The text details how entire guilds of ladies formed across the United Kingdom. And we need to understand the structural power of female philanthropy at this time.
Definitely.
Women were legally shut out of formal politics and voting, so they channeled their administrative brilliance and financial resources into massive philanthropic empires.
They became the financial backbone of the London City Mission.
And their funding wasn't just for Bibles. They funded the critical infrastructure needed to keep the mission alive. Weylland notes that one lady funded an entire seaside retreat on the Isle of Wight, specifically designed to repair the ruined health of the missionaries.
Because the physical toll was devastating.
I can't even imagine.
These men were spending 10 to 12 hours a day breathing in the miasma of disease-ridden, unsanitary, unventilated slums. They were contracting typhus, cholera, and tuberculosis constantly.
So the Isle of Wight retreat was essentially a medical triage center to keep them alive.
It was. And then the text mentions the anonymous elect lady who provided a massive 1,000-pound donation specifically to help build the new administrative headquarters for the mission.
And the location they chose for that new headquarters is arguably the greatest architectural irony in London's history.
Yes, it is.
The new mission house, which opened in 1874, was built squarely on the site of Bridewell.
Let's trace the history of Bridewell because it perfectly encapsulates the mission's entire philosophy. Bridewell started its life as a grand royal palace built for King Edward IV. But over the centuries, as the city changed, the building was handed over to Bishop Ridley.
Okay.
And he transformed it into a notorious vagrant prison and a whipping post.
So it became an institution of state-sanctioned cruelty. It was a place designed to break and punish the exact demographic of people the London City Mission was now trying to save.
And finally, in 1874, the site is transformed one last time. The ground where vagrants were once whipped and imprisoned becomes the nerve center for an organization dedicated entirely to their rescue and uplift.
Wow.
The stones that once echoed with the cries of the punished now supported the administration of radical empathy. It is a profound physical redemption of the space.
It is a literal reclaiming of ground. But as we reach the end of our source material, we have to zoom out and ask the ultimate historical question.
Right. Did it matter?
Exactly. We know they helped individuals. We know they changed labor laws for cab drivers. But did this massive network of 500 family districts actually change the trajectory of a society? Did it work on a macro scale? Weylland's book answers this by quoting the Earl of Shaftesbury, who in turn references the French statesman M. Guizot, and the conclusion is staggering.
It is one of the most remarkable historical claims in the text. Guizot, looking back at the mid-19th century, focuses specifically on the year 1848.
The year of revolution.
Exactly. In 1848, the political order of Europe essentially collapsed.
Yeah.
Thrones were toppling, governments were being overthrown in violent, bloody uprisings. France, Germany, Italy, the Austrian Empire, the continent was engulfed in revolutionary fire, driven by the desperate, starving working classes.
But England,
which had some of the most horrific industrial slums on earth, remained completely peaceful. There was no violent uprising.
And Guizot, a foreign statesman analyzing this anomaly from the outside, did not attribute England's tranquility to the strength of the British military or the brilliance of Parliament.
Oh.
He attributed it directly to the deep, stabilizing moral work of grassroots agencies like the London City Mission.
He theorized that the mission had acted as a massive societal pressure valve. When populations are completely abandoned, when they feel entirely unseen and unheard by the broader society, that isolation ferments into violent rage.
Right.
But the London City Mission had spent over a decade systematically infiltrating those forgotten spaces.
They had woven a net of relational trust.
Yes. They proved that grand political decrees and massive institutional structures rarely change the hearts of a population.
It's the groundwork.
The mission's success came through microscopic, relentless, individual human connections. By ensuring that every family in the slums had a domestic chaplain, someone who knew their name, who brought them medicine, who treated them with dignity, they bridged the massive chasm between the classes. They built a bridge of trust, one 500-family district at a time, until that bridge was strong enough to stabilize an entire nation during a period of global upheaval.
The sheer scale of that achievement is difficult to process. A movement that started with 4 guys in a living room in Hoxton who were explicitly told by the Bishop of London that their idea was too messy and unstable.
And they actually helped save the British Empire from violent revolution.
And they didn't do it with troops. They didn't do it with new legislation. They did it simply by looking the most discarded members of society in the eye and treating them with absolute dignity.
It proves that disruption, when applied to compassion and empathy, can be just as powerful, if not more so, than when applied to technology or commerce.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what does all of this mean for you listening right now? We live in an era where it is incredibly easy to look at the news and feel completely paralyzed by systemic issues.
Oh, absolutely.
We look at the homelessness crisis, the opioid epidemic, the extreme vitriolic societal division, and we convince ourselves that the problems are simply too big. We assume that only federal governments or billionaires or massive technological shifts can fix them.
But the rigorous, documented history of the London City Mission proves that assumption entirely wrong.
Yes, it proves that consistent, empathetic, face-to-face interaction has unimaginable, world-altering power. The simple act of repeatedly showing up for a small, specific group of people can literally change the course of a nation's history.
A really powerful reminder.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. The missionaries of the 1800s understood that if they waited for the broken to come to them, they would wait forever. They deliberately walked into the dark arches, the thieves' parlors, and the violence of the Ratcliffe Highway to find the people that polite society had completely thrown away.
Right.
So, where is the modern equivalent of the thieves' parlor today? Perhaps it's in our incredibly toxic, isolated digital spaces. Or perhaps it's in the marginalized physical communities right on the edge of your own city that everyone else actively avoids. The ultimate question the London City Mission leaves us with is this: who is brave enough to walk into those spaces today? Not with an agenda to argue, not with a mandate to judge, but to simply sit down, offer practical sympathy, and listen.
A question that definitely demands our attention.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.